Today's video is going to discuss the second method for solving for a linear system of equations. If we remember, the last one was graphing to solve. Now we're going to do substitution. The substitution method. And then there will be one more, and that will be elimination. So, like always, or like a lot of times in math, we have steps that we're going to need to follow. So the steps for substitution are as follows. Number one, you need to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. It does not matter which one that you pick to start with. I usually go with the one that's easier to solve, and you're going to see what I mean when we look at some examples. So the first step is just solving for one of the equations for one of the variables, and it does not matter which one. So the second step, we're going to substitute, hence where the name came from, the expression from step one into the other equation and solve for the other variable. Now this does sound a little bit confusing when I'm going through these steps, but I promise once we practice and once we do a couple, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So far that's steps 1 and 2. Third step. Here's where it gets a little confusing. We're going to substitute I spelled that wrong. Substitute the value from step 2 into the revised equation from step 1 and solve. Again, I know it sounds a little crazy right now. We have a bunch of different substituting and a bunch of different variables, but I promise when we look at an example, it'll make more sense. And the fourth one, we are going to check the solution in both original equations. And again, this step is optional. If I were you, I would do it every time. It doesn't hurt to check your answers when you have unlimited time to take these assessments. Also, and it's the same as we did before, right? The solutions right now that we're working with from these systems of equations are going to be an ordered pair. So just like we did on the last video, the first thing we did is we checked if the ordered pair was a solution. Well, that's what the check is going to be here, just like it was when you graphed it. When you graphed it, you had an ordered pair. You can plug it back in to check if that ordered pair works or not. And the main thing is that when you check, that ordered pair has to work in both of those solutions, or both of those equations, not just one. So now that we got the steps out of the way, let's start to look at some examples. So example 1. we have negative x plus y equals 1, and we have 2x plus y equals negative 2. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick an equation, just reiterating the steps, and variable to solve for. Okay, well, I'm going to look at my equation, my two equations that I have, and if you notice, negative x plus y equals 1 is pretty easy to solve for a variable. So I'm going to use that equation. Again, you can pick either one to start with. You're going to come up with the same answer. So it says pick an equation. I did that, and now I have to solve for one of the variables. So I'm going to solve for y. So to solve for y, I'm going to add x to both sides. Now I have y equals x plus 1. All right, so the next thing that we need to do, the next step, if you remember, is to substitute x plus 1 in for y in the second or the other equation and solve. So now that we know what y is equal to, we have solved for y. We know now that y is equal to x plus 1. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take the other equation. So if you remember, the other equation is 2x plus y equals negative 2. And we're going to substitute in this x plus 1 for y. All right, so 2x plus y is now x plus 1 equals negative 2. Okay, so we're eliminating the y and substituting in the new value that we got for it. Now we're just going to simplify and solve for x, right? X is the only remaining variable, so we want to simplify and solve for x. 3x plus 1 is equal to negative 2. We're going to move this over. 3x is equal to negative 3. Divide both sides by 3. And we get that x is equal to negative 1. So, like we mentioned, we are looking for an ordered pair, right? That's what our solution is going to be. Well, we already found one variable in our ordered pair. We know that x is going to be equal to negative 1. So now we got to figure out what y is equal to. And if you look, the next step says substitute x equals negative 1 into equation number 1 to find y. So let's do that. If you remember, equation number 1 was negative x plus y equals 1. Well, I know x is 1, so I'm going to plug it in. Negative. Did I pick the wrong equation? Nope. Okay. Negative 1 plus y equals 1. I have negative times negative is a positive 1 plus y equals 1. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I'm left with y equals 0. So now I have an x value, I have a y value, and I'm left with the ordered pair, negative 1, 0. And just like we did before, we could go back and check and see if that answer works. And remember, we have to check both equations. So we have negative x plus y equals 1, and we have 2x plus y equals negative 2. Just plug in our point real quick, right? Our point is negative 1, 0. I'm going to plug it in and see what happens. Negative 1 plus 0 equals 1. 1 plus 0 equals 1. 1 equals 1. Check. Other side. 2 times a negative 1 plus 0 equals negative 2. negative 2 plus 0 equals negative 2, negative 2 equals negative 2. Check, that's right too. So negative 1, 0 is the solution to this system of, or linear system. All right, I know that was kind of a lot. It seems like a lot of steps, but once you get the hang of it, it's going to be a lot easier. So let's look at another example. Example 2. We have the equations 2x plus 2y equals 3 and x minus 4y equals negative 1. Okay? So let's first think. We're going to solve one of the equations for one of the variables. And since the second one looks easy, I'm going to solve number 2 for x. So here we go. X minus 4y equals, it's going to be a negative 1. I just have to move the 4y over, and I have x equals 4y minus 1. I'm always all about putting the variable first, 4y minus 1, but if you have negative 1 plus 4y, it's the same thing. Okay, now I've solved for x. So the next thing I have to do is I'm going to go to equation 1, right? Because I used equation 2. So now I'm going to go to equation 1 and substitute 4y minus 1 in for x in number 1. Okay, so in equation 1, right, I just found out that x is equal to this. So I'm going to take equation 1, right, I used 2 to solve for x, so now I'm going to use equation 1. And where I see x, I'm going to plug in what I found for x. So 2 times 4y minus 1 plus 2y equals 3. And now I just have to simplify and solve for y. If you notice, now I have all variables of y. So I just need to simplify this equation and solve for y. So I'm going to distribute 8y minus 2 plus 2y equals 3. I have 8y and 2y. I have 10y minus 2 equals 3. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. 10y equals 5. Now I can divide both sides by 10, and I get y equals 1/2. All right, so I have solved for one of my variables. I found y to be 1/2. So now all I have to do is substitute back in and find out what x is. So I'm going to substitute 1/2 into equation number 2 and find x. So basically, in the beginning, you pick an equation. That's the one that you substitute for, or you solve for x in, or whatever variable. Then you go back to the other equation, and then finally you go back to the original. So we went equation 2 to start, equation 1, and now we're back to 2. So I'm going to substitute it in. I have my equation, so I'm going to plug in y to be 1/2. X minus 4 times 1/2 equals -1. So here we go. X minus 2 equals -1. I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 1. So now I have found my point, 1/1/2. When you start this last step right here, when you found y, now you're substituting back in, you can use this equation up here also, because it's already saying x is equal to whatever y, and you're substituting for y. So this equation, x equals 4y minus 1, And this equation right here are equivalent equations. They just look differently. So at the end, when you go to find that last missing variable, in this case x, it doesn't matter if you use this equation or this equation. Okay? Let me show you what I mean. We said x equals 4y minus 1. I can go down here. X equals 4y minus 1. We're trying to find x. 4y is, what do we find y to be? A half. Minus 1, x equals 2, minus 1, x equals 1. Okay? So either way works, whatever you feel more comfortable. Some people like to use that equation that you already solved for x. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. All right, let's do one more example. Okay, so again, the first step, we're going to solve for a specific variable. Since g is pretty much all by itself over here, I'm going to solve for g. So I have g minus 2h equals 9. I'm going to add the 2h to the other side, and I get g equals 2h plus 9. Now I have to go to the other equation, and I have to plug in. So let's go back to my other equation. I started with 2. I'm going back to equation 1. 7g plus h equals negative 2. And I know what g is. We just found out what g is. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in for g. 7 times 2h plus 9 plus h equals negative 2. And now I just have to solve for h. Distribute. (14h) equals, oops, sorry, not equals. Sorry. Okay. Plus 63 plus h equals negative 2. And now I just have to combine my terms. 14 plus 1h is 15h plus 63 equals negative 2. And then I subtract 63. I get 15h equals negative 65. I'm going to divide both sides by 15. I get h is equal to, when I simplify, I get a negative 13 divided top and bottom by 3. So now that I found h, I have to go back and plug this in to find what g is. So I got to go back up to here. I know that g is equal to 2h plus 9. G is equal to 2h plus 9. I know that h is negative 13 over 3, so I'm going to plug it in. G is equal to 2 times negative 13 over 3 plus 9. So G is equal to negative 26 divided by 3 plus 9. And if I simplify that, I'm going to get negative 1/3. G is equal to negative 1/3. Okay, so now you're wondering, we have a G and we have an H. Which one is which? Well, when you're doing this, you want to put them in alphabetical order. So G comes before H, So my point is going to be negative 1/3 and negative 13/3. All right, I know this was a lot of steps and it seems a little complex, but we will practice more when I see you in class.